All right. It looks like we are officially live. Hello, everybody. Joshua Hatton with ImpEx Beverages here. And actually, I get to wear two hats today. I get to say Joshua Hatton of ImpEx Beverages and Single Cask Nation here. I'm wearing two hats today because the third in our Drinks With series is a focus on independent bottlers. And while I am the National Sales Director for ImpEx, I'm also the president and co-founder of Single Cask Nation. So I'm happy to be wearing two hats this evening. I'm really happy in that with this Drinks With episode, I have a co-host. What do you like to be called, Susanna?
I think co-host is probably more appropriate. You need more people for a cohort, and there's just two of us. So we could be a cohort unto ourselves. But yes.
Okay. Well, what if we added in Sam Filmus? Are we then a cohort?
Now we are a proper cohort.
Hello, I'm happy to have two co-hosts like yourselves to host the thing. So please share that.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited to have you, and thank you again. It was so nice having you in the previous series. So to have you in this series to close off the year, our final episode, it's always good to see your face. So
just my cameo.
I'm gonna bring in our friends Jenny and Connal from Adelphi. How are you both?
Hello.
Very good, thank you. How are you?
A little more awake than you, I think. I don't know. There you go. Double fisted. I love it.
One of those better be coffee or a very strong tea, Connal.
Or an IPA.
Or that.
Next, I'm going, and first off, thank you all so much for staying up so late. I realize it's about 1:30 where you are, so thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm going to bring in my good friend, my business partner of going on 11 years, Jason Johnstone-Yellin, who's recovering from a booster shot. So we'll see if he stays awake.
It has been a rough day filled with naps, but it's not 1:30 for me, so I'm not going to complain. Lovely to see everybody.
And then finally, I'd like to invite the team from Elixir Distillers, Julie Hamilton, Chanel Liquori, Oliver Chilton, and we're honored to have Mr. Sukhinder Singh with us here as well.
Hi, guys.
Hello, all. How's everybody doing?
Don't say thank you to us for staying up to 1:30. It's just favoritism.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you from the bottom of this bottle of Imperial 21-year-old. So there we go.
That's the point. Definitely.
So thank you all again for joining, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I sent you all a question in advance to get our cognitive juices flowing. So I'm going to put it up on the screen here for our viewers. So between the group here, we have 4 different independent bottlers, and we all have different ways in which we run our business, or maybe different ways in which we founded our business. And so my question to you is if you can explain your approach to independent bottling and how you present your brands to the whiskey and other spirits world. So actually, I'd like to start with Sukhinder and the Elixir team, if that's okay.
Hi, guys. Okay, how do we approach this? I've copied everything that Adelphi do. Nice and simple. It's a very difficult question. I think for me, it was probably one of the most important learning tools. And I think people underestimate how important independent bottlers actually are. Some of the distillers despise them. Some of the distillers say, you know, you guys do a good job. You've helped us grow our brands in different ways. So I think that's a very important element. I think the way I look at it is it teaches people many different things. I mean, when you're looking at standard whiskies from proprietary bottlings or proprietary companies, you know, they're actually blends. You know, they could be a mixture of a bit of bourbon, a bit of refill, a bit of sherry in different proportions. Whereas I think in independent bottling, what we show is, in most cases, the purer side. You know, in some cases, you can say the more honest side. Some people will, again, disagree with that and say, no, it's not quite right. But I feel that's quite important as well. So approach, you know, how did we start independent bottling? I mean, I learned a hell of a lot. I'm very lucky because when I started, which is a good 30, 35 years ago, I would say I learned from some of the best bottlers, including Scotch Malt Whisky Society, including Signatory, Cadenheads. For me, you know, they're all inspirations. Even I'm going to say Adelphi, Jamie Walker, who started it, was a really dear friend. And everyone's approach is very different, you know. So for me, you know, we just do what we do. As I said, I've learned a lot through independent bottling. I'll give you an example. You know, Klein Leash today is very, very popular. When I go back 25, 30 years ago, there was a big period where there was no Klein Leash on the market from the distiller. So I learned Klein Leash from an independent bottler, or from independent bottlings as such.
Yeah.
But, you know, today Klein Leash is, you know, one of the most talked about whiskies out there. Everyone's little secret and everyone's love in many ways. Over to the rest of the team.
So yeah, Ollie, Chanel, and Ollie, you're the gentleman behind Port Ascaig and how that's created. I mean, I think that in and of itself is a slightly unusual. I wouldn't say necessarily an unusual approach, but when we think of independent bottling, it's usually single cask strength, rather than creating a brand through the lens of, you know, multiple casks from a singular distillery, right? So
I guess that comes back to what Sukhinder said about learning. So if you think about your Gordon MacPhail's and your Cadenheads going back a long way, they would have bottled big batches from distilleries. That would have been pretty standard. And Gordon MacPhail are probably responsible for more brand building than any distiller in reality. I mean, they created what Macallan, Talisker. You could, if you just wrote a list of the biggest brands, they've all probably at some point been bottled by Gordon MacPhail, and to some degree, it wasn't single cask; it was bigger batches.
Strathyla, Glen Grant.
Yeah, I think that approach really comes from learning. I was thinking more about the fact that as a company we're on a journey, and it's exactly as Sukhinder says, we're learning from our peers, we're learning from everyone else who do great jobs, and we I guess we're unreservedly a bit of a magpie, so we pick up ideas and then we have a go at it. Luckily they don't all screw up in front of thousands of people all at once. I mean, some do. But I guess our approach is exactly that: is study. So look at what someone's doing, understand what we love about it, understand what we would change about it ourselves, and then try and formulate that into something. The one thing that comes beyond all of that is liquid. We come from, I think it's fair to say, we come from a retail background. even though Sukhinder just flogged the retail side and screw that. But both he and I started in shops, and I think when you start, especially in specialist whiskey shops, you work with so many different products, and it's all about taste, right? So someone comes into the shop, they ask you what it tastes like, you have to explain that. You have to find a thing they like so they come back, which gives you a kind of, for me, a flavor first before brand. And we take that approach to everything we do. Flavor first, flavor first. I imagine that's true for pretty much everybody to some degree, but it's certainly something we focus on. And then in terms of the kind of the brand side stuff like Porterskeg, that is very much learning as we go. So there's an idea in your head. Okay, this idea of having a bigger brand or a bigger label around one distillery or one style, and then it's a case of learning. So Porterskeg, we've learned over the course of whatever it is now, 13 years, how that comes together. It wasn't a thought out plan at the start. That's what sensible companies do. That's not our way. Our way is to develop and learn as we go.
Cool. Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm looking at this panel, and I realize I've got to toss this question around to a lot of people. Sam, if you don't mind, I'd like to hop over to you, because I think your approach to creating an independently bottled line of whiskey is slightly different than, I would say, Adelphi or Single Cask Nation, which may be a bit more traditional. You're coming at it from the standpoint of an importer adding a permanent line to your portfolio. Can you talk about your approach to it?
Sure, Joshua. No way we're going to copy Adelphi or Single Malts of Scotland. We would have never sold our whiskey. Who needs this? Joke.
Not spoiled early, Sam Filmus.
So my career in whiskey business started with independent bottler. I was representing Signatory for a good number of years, and then joined by Gordon MacPhail, and then Chieftains and Hart Brothers and Blackadder and Old Malt Cask and Single Cask Nation, if you heard of this. Sometimes they abbreviate it as SCN, but you might want to look at, you might want to find them by Googling. And we were learning from older independent bottles like Gordon MacPhail, but also I think the category became so popular, so we kind of piggybacking the success of Adelphi's and Single Malts of Scotland's and even Single Cask Nation. But I think the most important thing that I learned in this business is dealing with people like Andrew Symington, Michael Urquhart, Sukhinder Singh, Susanna, Ollie Chilton, and Joshua Hatton. That's another name that you might heard of, but again, let me know. And Jason Johnson and Yellin. And I think we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to support the category. Yes, I'm in a chair of importer, but it's pretty much the same in terms of finding good quality casks, something that would have gotten lost in some blends or some bigger distillery releases. We're trying with ImpEx. Again, we're not trying to compete or even compare to others, but at the same time, we bring some rums, we bring some, we're about to bring some mezcal. We brought some Japanese whiskey. So whatever is in your glass that brings you pleasure and the quality and some story, we're after. That's
great. Now, I've left Jenny and first off, Sam, thank you so much for that. Jenny, I've left you and Connal to for the last to be asked, but Sam and I had a conversation with Charlie McLean earlier this week, and we asked him a similar question, And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to play that. It's just about a 4-minute clip of the conversation, and that may or may not adjust your answer. Or you may just say, you know what? Charlie said it. Let's move on.
Okay.
Perfect.
So far, you're saying, why did I wake up at 1:30? It's to
Yeah,
drink whiskey and
yes.
a pint.
Pretty much. Yep.
No, I think over to Charlie is a great
Cheers.
idea.
All right, here we go. Let's see if this works. It should work.
The market has changed. You've got investors as well as collectors and consumers.
Yeah.
So the prices are, and those who've got fine old casks of whiskey, whether they're the brokers or whether they're the brand owners, they're hanging on to them, you know, and they need them for their deluxe blends, and they need them for these eye-watering prices that that some casks achieve now, particularly in Asia. And so it's extremely difficult to find good old casks of sufficient quality for the likes of Adelphi. Same is true with any other independent bottler. Some of them are not quite so picky, frankly, as Adelphi. But a lot of them have had to go into, in order to stay in the trade, you know, you've got to be able to diversify effectively into building your own distillery. So Gordon MacPhail bought then Roemuch Distillery. Andrew Symington, what was his company called? Signatory.
Yeah.
He bought Edredar Distillery. Weems, who came much later, they built King's Barnes Distillery, and so it goes on. You know, so the serious players had to have their own distillery. So this was quite apparent by, I would guess, about 2010 to Adelphi, that in order, if they were going to be serious, they had to build a distillery. So Donald and Keith looked at that, and they did some research, and they found this site on the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, which was right, both in terms of the supply of water, but also the supply of windfall trees. There was a lot of forestation on Ardnamurchan, and so they could do wood chip burn, or run the stills with wood chip, or run the heating, etc., the heating water, etc., on wood chip, so ecologically sort of sound. And so that was why they decided to build a distillery. But it is difficult. It is very difficult for independent bottlers now. The whole of the whiskey industry, so I'm sure you're aware, and your viewers are aware. They may not be aware, but it's so much to do with contacts and trust. You know, it's like the Scotch whiskey industry is like a big family. You know, and everybody knows everybody or knows of everybody, and you know, that actually is why Alex has been so good, because he's developed. Jamie has some good context. Alex has developed it massively with the distillers themselves and brokers and what have you, wherever he can get casks from, and indeed now trade casks with. You see, because the you know, part of the income in due course from Ardnamurchan will come from trading casks with blenders, with other whiskey companies, because the Scotch whiskey industry is always dependent upon this for blending, this reciprocation is called.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and but whew, I don't know whether, because you know, Ardnamurchan has the whiskey has done extraordinarily well. I'm sure you'll know, Sam, because you're the agent for it in America, and it's done extraordinarily well. And of course, it's a very limited amount each bottling at the moment, and I think will continue to be, because again, with the same ethos of standard that's set by Adelphi, the Ardnamurchan is so they don't have any ambitions to become a massive global brand, but they've already upped the capacity of the distillery. They built numerous warehouses on site, and it's a very interesting thing.
You know, Joshua, that he's still up, right? You could have probably, Joshua, you could have had him on this call. He's still in a pub somewhere, still happy, still going. Why?
I can guarantee you that he will not be.
Elliot being in his bed at 8 o'clock.
8 or 9 o'clock tops, yeah.
But the reason why I wanted to play that before your answer is, you know, while Elixir Distillers is, I think you've just broken ground on your distillery on Isla, and firstly, congratulations on that. It's such a fantastic step forward for you all, and I'm bursting at the seams with excitement for you. You know, Arden American, you've had your distillery for a while, and Adelphi, similar to Signatory and Gordon MacPhail, like Charlie was saying, Adelphi then built your own distillery, and so I just wanted to include that because, again, you're coming from a slightly different perspective of independent bottling, where now your independent bottling, at one point in the conversation, he said, is going to help your distillery, and then vice versa. So I wonder if you could talk about that sort of synergy between the distillery and the bottling company.
Sure. Jenny, do you want me to, I'll take this.
Yeah,
So,
you'll take that one.
yeah. So no, it's great because it is a different angle, as you said, and you know, Adelphi's been going since sort of the end of 1992 as an independent bottler. Obviously, it was a distillery many moons ago prior to that, but the cask situation, as Charlie said, you know, it's not what it used to be in sort of 2007, 2008. It wasn't. You know, you weren't getting offered the same parcels. You know, you were having to buy blind more than what you'd want to buy blind, and things were getting pretty dicey. Alex managed to sort of promote Adelphi around the world. You know, he kept renewing that passport and just kept going round and round and round, and that's pretty much cemented us with good distribution around the world. So Adelphi's well known, you know, as far wide as New Zealand, the US, Canada, and everywhere in between. So yeah, I think that's stood us in good stead, and Arden American has now provided a platform. Now we're starting to see potential benefits of being able to bring back Adelphi and make Adelphi stronger. I think a lot of people might have thought that Adelphi would start to dwindle, to be honest. And we're never going to be massive independent bottler. That's not our focus, but it gives us the ability to potentially trade casks and use Arden American liquid, which we're quite happy to do. Trade with other independent bottlers and such like. So it's given us a different angle to get our hands on some great liquid. And just in regards to adding to how we run as an independent bottler, it's very much basic on flavour and taste. And would we go back for another pour, another dram? And I first heard that when I was actually helping an importer in New Zealand, and I thought, well, that's a lovely story, but it must be rubbish. You know, I mean, you can't run a business on that. And 3 years later, I joined the company, and I'm flabbergasted to say that is how it is. And we just sit around the boardroom table, or sometimes Alex's dining room table, and we just go through a heap of samples. And if we like them, it goes into a bottle. Doesn't matter how old it is, what distillery it comes from. It just if it meets criteria, it's good enough for us.
Beautiful. You know, I realized I tossed this over to you. I didn't even get to ask Jason Johnstone-Yellin the same question. You're in the distance here. I was giving you time to rest because you just had a visitor. So go ahead. Tell us all about it.
So Joshua, I don't know if you've heard of Single Cask Nation. I believe Sam has. Sam has recommended that you Google it to find out more about it. But first of all, it's an incredible thrill to be on this panel. This is a who's who of the industry, and I can't believe I'm one of the squares. So I feel like it's the best edition of Blankety Blank that I've ever seen. That's only going to work for a certain segment of the audience. What was that, Sukhinder?
I said it's actually a rectangle.
but Jason is a square.
Oh, I wish you had a
Precision
handheld
is
mic.
everything, Jason.
You
Precision.
could just drop Sukhinder. That was perfect. I feel suitably chaste. So yeah, obviously for us, Single Cask Nation was about building community. First and foremost, the reason that we called it the Nation. Greg Swartz of the Water of Life film has been messaging to say he expects to see a Batman-style nighttime call in the sky as we empower the nation to come out and right wrongs. So I think there's something to be explored there. But yeah, the thing for us was definitely putting single casks at cask strength in front of an American audience who perhaps didn't know what it was we were doing or what it was we were trying to achieve. And I know that 10 years ago, for you and me, Joshua, there was a lot of how does this compare to Johnny Walker? And why aren't you just selling Johnny Walker? And so there was that kind of building a community at the same time we were selling to it, and having a nation grow, under us, who really understood and really appreciated what it was we were trying to achieve with our selections, and to have now 10 years later reached a point where we're known for textured drams. We're known for quality selections where even if you're not overly familiar with the distillery, you trust the selection from Single Cask Nation. And that was 10 years of pounding the pavement and traveling coast to coast and north to south across the United States, and then having the opportunity to roll in Jess in Glasgow and Elijah in the Pacific Northwest to continue to grow that message as well. And then with our dear, dear friend Sam Filmus, to have this retail opportunity with Single Cask Nation, going from the online sales, which we clearly still have, but adding in retail and then trusting store owners, distributors, our very own importer, to put those bottles in front of people, those single casks in front of people, has been another mammoth step. But boy, if it's not doing incredibly well. So a lot of excitement throughout the nation as we go global, and it's exciting.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sorry, I can't
I'm going to go nap on this couch now.
Yeah,
I'm going to take another 5-minute nap. I'll be ready again.
There was a good question that came in the comments, but I wanted to, and we'll get to some of these questions as they arise, but Susanna, I imagine there's a lot of questions floating around your mind, so I wanted to give you the floor.
Thanks. Well, I actually had this question prepared, and I think it's a good one, a good segue from what Jason was just talking about. Most of the people on this call live in the UK and are quite familiar with the UK market, and I'm sure most of you are also quite familiar with the US market. But there are two different cultures of Scotch whiskey drinkers, I think, divided by the Atlantic Ocean, and independent bottlers here, in my experience, have always been just a much tougher sell, price-wise, branding-wise, in terms of name recognition. My question for the group, and if anyone wants to volunteer to take it first, is, in your experience, what is a misunderstanding about IBs that if you could clear one thing up for consumers, what would that be?
I would say the first one that ever came to me when I was working in the States was that we were somehow ripping the whiskey people off with these fakes, or I don't think they could understand why possibly we would have a Bowmore, why possibly you would have an Imperial, why someone else wouldn't be selling that, and trying to explain, and you're almost getting a pen and paper out and drawing diagrams and trying to explain to them, with as much passion as you possibly can. And the only way I can ever counteract that is is just by getting them to taste it and getting in front of people and telling the story of how IBs work and what IBs are able to do for the whiskey industry as a whole, not just for your company, but actually for the category as a whole, and how important that is. Yeah, that's definitely one of the big pushbacks I got in the States, for sure, mate.
And in line with that as well, there's a kind of misconception out there that we're getting lesser casks. So things that people don't want, we'll get, the things that they need rid of and the things that they don't want. And just as Chanel said, it's about getting people interested and getting them to taste these whiskies and seeing that that's actually not the case at all. So that would be the one for me, would be that it's definitely not the lesser of the casks of whiskey that we're getting our hands on.
I worked in a whiskey shop 15, 16 years ago in Edinburgh in the Old Town, and as I was studying, and I found selling independent bottlings incredibly hard. I mean, I knew my whiskey already then. I was studying brewing and distilling, but people would come into the shop looking for the Macallan or the Bowmore, or what they've seen on TV, or
still looking for that.
And it was just the brand had grown so big, and what Sukhinder mentioned Clynelish earlier, I learned about Clynelish the same way from independent bottlers, and it's one of my favorite drinks and whiskeys, or drinks actually. So I remember being in this shop and people would come in and say what budget they had, and you would just say, well, you could get the Bowmore for that, whatever, 25, 30 pounds. This is 2005. But you could get a cask strength, something so unique and special from the island, same island, but just different, a bit more unique. And the effort that it took as a retail assistant, almost, it was almost too much sometimes. If you were busy in the shop, I remember thinking it's easier just to point them to whatever they know or what they're expecting. But that's 15, 16 years ago. Now, in those shops around, I don't know, London, but Edinburgh for sure, if Adelphi hits the shelf and stays on the shelves, that's a miracle. They just go straight away. People now know and have almost taken that step further. So maybe America is 15 years up and coming. I don't know, but it takes a bit of education, but once you get there, you don't go back.
And I think there's a lot of brand loyalty with that too.
Yeah.
If you get people tasting and they know that every time they've had an Adelphi, it's been delicious. When they've gone to a whiskey show or however they're trying it, every time they've had a single malt of Scotland, it's been delicious. You know that the next time they see one, regardless of, the distillery, they might not have heard it before, they'll give it a crack,
Absolutely.
Yeah, the one that I agree with Julie wholeheartedly, that was going to be my first point, is, I'm sure you only get the dregs, which is so far from the truth. But I had another very strange one way in the beginning, and I still hear echoes of it, but I was pouring a distillery bottling of Arran next to a single cask nation Arran, and somebody came up after the tasting and said, I really liked your Arran, but I really don't like theirs. And I said, it's all theirs. It's every drop is theirs. All we've done is show you a different take on it and maybe a different cask. Like, don't give up on a distillery. Like, even though you like this single cask, so keep exploring. And I think that's really what independent bottlers bring to the table, is that opportunity to really put a number of versions of the same distillery side by side by side and explore that world.
That was certainly something I was going to bring up, is that there are some distilleries whose own bottlings don't really light my world on fire, but I've been convinced to try, it doesn't take a lot of convincing, but I've tried IB bottlings of those same distilleries and been absolutely blown away. So I don't know if anyone has ever used it as a sales tool in that way. Like, someone walks up, they're like, oh, I hate that distillery, I can't stand anything they make. And then you get them to try a little sip of your single cask, and suddenly their whole world is reopened.
Yeah.
You basically highlighted what Peter Hunt here said. I'm sorry, Sukhinder. It just really quickly, his point here was that he found other friends saying that they thought IBs had the lesser quality whiskey, but then when he introduced them to IBs, he said, "Oh, wait a second, this is This is better than the official bottlings. I like this now. So it takes those educators to show people what IBs can do. I'm sorry, Sukhinder, please go.
I mean, what I was going to say was, in part, what everyone's saying is completely right, but I think it's important to say that there is also an element of independent bottlers who in many cases are not bottling good stuff. Yeah, because we've had a lot of customers, we see it in the shops, that, people have heard about IBs, they know they're a lot more expensive, and they've taken the plunge to go and buy a bottle or two, and they've been disappointed. And that's actually put them off, and it scared them. And I think that's where you need to draw the line between a good independent bottler and an average independent bottler. I'm not going to say a bad independent bottler because, for me, there's two camps of independent bottlers. There is the independent bottler that is laying down stock and is not in a rush to sell. And there's the second independent bottler who's working, you could say, hand to mouth, and they're buying casks and bottling casks, and then they blow out and buy another batch of casks and they bottle those casks and sell them. And in many cases, I think it's a simple scenario of beggars can't be choosers. They buy because they're buying on such small quantities. They just buy whatever they can get, and they're bottling whatever they can get. So I think there is a fine line between a good independent bottler and an average independent bottler. And I think the big difference is with a good independent bottler, the bottles just sell straight away. Of course, Chanel and Julie do an amazing job to push them, but that's the hard work they do by putting liquid to lips, making people try, and gaining confidence that everything we've tried from this bottler has been pretty good. That's how the trust builds.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Cheers. Yeah, very well said.
My biggest challenge in the beginning was people from trade or a consumer would ask me, why is this bottle of or the label of Macallan doesn't look like a Macallan label? That was number one question. Then about 5 years later, I like bringing something that is not mainstream. I mean, it's great to sell Springbanks and Broras and Rosebanks and etc. But I like finding something like Glenallachie when it was not a single cask. Single malt, single cask of Glenallachie or, Glenbergie or something like that. And that was another challenge. Oh, never heard of it. That's it. That's my sale is done. Never heard of it. And lately, I think, and I still have some customers that pushing it back, would be the undisclosed or secret distillery. They would not touch it, even not giving a chance to see what's inside this bottle. Maybe it's a golden juice there. No, it's not. So, but I agree with everyone who said that before. The category is growing, and Sukhinder, of course, quality is number one. Doesn't matter if it's a Macallan or it's a Glenbergie. If I like this Glenbergie, that would be for me Macallan, because that's what we bring to the customer as something that they would never heard of the distillery or never tried it as a pure single cask expression.
If we're all okay to move on there, first off, Sam, thank you, and thanks to everybody for your answers. This is really great. And Susanna, thank you. I love that question. There was a question that came in from Reginald Ritter, which I thought was intriguing, right? As we started off, there's a ton of humbleness on this panel, but at some point in the day, we are competing for the same customers, while at the same time praising one another for all we're doing. So how do we balance this competition with humbleness? And would you agree that it is competition?
Well, personally, I think that our competition is getting people away from gin and vodka and rum on this panel, but probably not if we do a rum panel. I I think one of the nicer things, and I guess in whiskey in general, but specifically in Scotch, or particularly in Scotch, is it is very much almost a family feel to an industry. We've seen it both from you see it when you're on the road traveling. So I have some interesting experiences around the world with many of the people on this panel, most of which I can't repeat at all in public.
Thank you.
Don't shake your head too hard, Connal. And that then extends even into the business side, and even as you mentioned, we've cut ground on our distillery, and a good example would be when we were looking at, or still are, but when we're looking at how to power that distillery, one of the first people we called was Alex and Connal, because Alex Bruce has done that, and he will give us information, he will help us, and it's the only industry I think you could phone up someone would say they're your direct competitor and ask for advice, and they will openly give it, and openly help you to achieve something, and that's a pretty special place to be. And the reason for that is because we're trying to grow a category, and Scotch whiskey is probably, out of all the whiskey categories, been the best at doing that, and they do it as a group. They move as a group, and that means that as a category it grows. I remember years ago speaking to someone very senior in marketing at Diageo, and they were, this is probably 2007-ish, and they were putting together what they called the flavour map and basically it was 4 whiskies around a flavour map. And on the map they had all these whiskies, but it wasn't just Diageo whiskies, it was other whiskies, and it was all being marketed. And I said, what's the thought of telling people, well, this is what Macallan tastes like when you're Diageo? And they said, well, as a company we own whatever it was, 20% of the Scotch whiskey market. So if the Scotch whiskey category grows by 20%, then we get 20% of that growth. And so if we're working together, we're going to continue to grow. And it was very much, we have to aim for taking drinkers away from other categories. If you're putting it down to everybody's only got $100 in their wallet, and you've got to fight for that $100, then we want them to spend it on Scotch whiskey. On a more micro level, I want them to spend it on independent bottling, because that's what I love and what I enjoy. And again, we're part of that community. So if everyone starts spending their $100 on independent bottling, there's a better chance of them spending it on our products. The flip side is there's probably not enough whiskey to go around anyway. So even if everyone spent their $100 on whiskey, we'd run out like next week.
I would say on an education side, in terms of my cupboard is filled with competition. It's delicious, and getting to know and know what's out there as well is really important.
That's a really, really good point. When I look at my shelves over here, it's Dougie Lang, it's Duncan Taylor, Gordon MacPhail, Single Malt of Scotland, Adelphi. It runs the gamut. Dare I say, even some single cask nation, right? But you want to see what other people are doing, and I think in maybe a strange way, just making sure you're continuing to stay on the path that you thought you were getting on when you started it, and not bleeding over into maybe what those other people do or what these other people do. So I think it's good. Research and development, Chanel, it's a good point. A lot of research and development.
Aside to that, it shows that you're really passionate about it as well, though, and it is actually a thing that you enjoy. It's not just your job. It's you're drinking whiskies from all these different IBs, and it's because you enjoy that, and because you're looking for that next flavour, and you're looking for that next thing. So maybe everybody's influencing each other in a way as well.
I have a follow-up kind of to this. I was going to ask, how much do trends in the broader industry impact your choices as independent bottlers? For example, virgin oak. If everyone started releasing a virgin oak, OB, single malt next week, would you, even if you had never worked with virgin oak casks before, consider, well, we have a little bit of this stock, let's move it into virgin oak and see what happens? I mean, how responsive are you to what seem to be broader industry or consumer trends versus kind of continuing to chart your own course and make decisions based on what you value and what you like at the end of the day?
I think you've got the wrong independent bottlers here.
Yeah, I was. Thanks, Sukhinder. That's perfect.
This is a gut check.
Bish bash bosh. There we go. Yeah, just to second that. Yeah, we haven't touched that kind of thing for Adelphi. Might start looking at different casks for the Merkin, but Adelphi wise, I think we've only ever done one. I think it was a white wine finish for a Swiss customer once, to my knowledge, and that's pretty much all we've ever done. So it's pretty much bourbon and sherry for Adelphi.
I mean, that was just one example. It could also, trickle down. It doesn't have to be a cask finish. It could be, if next week everyone decided they wanted their labels to be only green and purple, and that was the only thing that was selling, would that compel you to change your packaging?
We have never changed in 30 years. We're not changing in the next 30 years.
Let's all have a go. Let's all have a go at Adelphi's labels. Come on.
That was pure coincidence.
Do you think though? I think there's a difference between learning from other people, and I guess what you're talking about is marketing trends. I'd imagine there's absolutely no one on this call who would say they particularly follow modern marketing trends from big companies in terms of, or at least letting those direct your production decisions. So I don't think anyone here's got a panel of people who go out and ask customers, do you like virgin oak? Oh, we shall re-rack everything into virgin oak, as an example, not as a specific. However, what I would say is we're forever going and trying other stuff. So whether that's other independent bottler stuff or whether it's new distilleries, and luckily because the whiskey industry is quite open, asking questions and learning from that. So if you take virgin oak as an example, we have stock laid down in virgin oak, but all the research we did said don't touch it, just leave it, come back to it in 16 years. I mean, that's quite a commitment and a bit of a gamble. When it goes wrong, I'll owe Sukhinder an awful lot of money, but we've only ever done that from going off and tasting whiskey where that has happened and seeing the result and then going, okay, we really like that result. The marketing handle's neither here nor there. I just want the result. I want it to taste like that. I like that flavor. How's that created? How do we get there? But I think that's driven from the same place. I like what it tastes like. And I think kind of echoing what was said by Chanel and Jenny and Connal, you're always living to some degree on your last bottle. So whatever you bottled last has to taste good. The marketing, just because it's in virgin oak, is actually not going to sell anything in the end, because if it tastes utterly shite, they're not buying the next bottle. So
yeah, there's something that we always say internally, is that we never have our customers in mind when we select a cask. We always have our own palates in mind, and people come to us because their palates align with ours. So if we started thinking about someone else, then we're taken off the track that we've set ourselves on from the beginning. So it's kind of an odd approach to putting out a product where you say, I'm not thinking of my customers. I'm thinking, would I open my wallet to buy this bottle? And would I pour a dram? And would I pour another one? And would I pour another one? If the answer is yes, then I'll put it in a bottle and hope those that share a similar palate will purchase it.
I think it's one thing today which is really important is, it's that learning. I know we say we're constantly learning, but we genuinely are. I think as it's getting more difficult to find the big names that everybody wants, It's more important to actually go and rediscover distilleries which you might not necessarily be drinking every day. Glencadam, Int'l, Glen Moray, things like that, which and you suddenly discover actually some of these are absolutely beautiful whiskies. It's like Sam was talking about earlier, Glenbergie. We were one of the first, I think, to push Glenbergie. We found a little parcel, we fell in love with it, and we bought a lot of it, and we're still selling it, and absolutely everybody loves it. It's such a lovely, lovely distillery that nobody talks about. Same with Imperial. There's been Imperial on the market, but only from a couple of independent bottlers. Significantly had some lovely stock, and then it sort of just disappeared. And then we found a lovely parcel, and everyone's sort of rediscovering Imperial, and it's like, this is amazing. So I think it's important to learn. It's important to experiment, but not necessarily rush it. As Ollie says, our learnings show with certain types of wood, certain types of wine casks, how you use them, it's really important. Otherwise, if you're using straight away, there's a difference between using New World wine casks and Old World wine casks. Yeah, Old World wine casks are very tannic. New World wine casks are a lot more fruitier. That's education. You use them a second time round, you get a completely different liquid. That's another education.
Yeah.
To that point, and to go from your question there, Susanna, is we're not necessarily looking at buying up a bunch of virgin oak or STR or what have you, but I will say, in seeing established distilleries putting out those types of casks, as I'm at a distillery and going around a warehouse, if they're telling me they've got some virgin oak or STR or Fino, or you can tell I visit Jim Swan distilleries. As I'm going around there, I'm very intrigued to see what their spirit is doing in that type of cask. And then, and absolutely to Joshua's point a moment ago, selecting for our own palates, but also knowing that for the nation, STR is going to pique their interest. Virgin Oak is going to pique their interest. Grand Cru is going to pique their interest. So there's definitely something there that keeps my eyes and ears open, and certainly my palate open, as I'm learning about a distillery. But definitely not doing that with our own re-racking projects. That's certainly not a thing we're doing.
So speaking of, go ahead, Jenny. Yeah.
No, just as on a note to Susanna's question and following on Jason's comments, I'm relatively new to Adelphi, not to the whiskey industry, but to Adelphi, and so is Graham, our other sales guy, and we joined in the last year and a half. And since joining, learning obviously from Alex and Connal, but we've been given freedom to find casks as well. So me being Swedish, having Swedish contacts means like I have introduced a Swedish cask. Graham is mad into rum. We've talked about rum. It's another drink you can drink. And we've, through him, chosen some rum casks. So even though we are a traditional independent bottler, and then it's all about flavor, and it doesn't matter if it's a 5-year-old Ben Nevis or a 30-year-old Macallan. If it's flavor, if the flavor is there, and if we like it, we'll bottle it. It's about the quality, and we've said it before, all of us. But the fact that as a team we're growing as well, and we're bringing different things, that means we can explore a bit more, and still sticking with the theme of flavor. That to me was quite a nice bonus with joining the team. I didn't realize I would get that freedom.
There was a thank you, Jenny. There was a question that came in before the session. So with each event, we've invited viewers to send questions in ahead of time, and we received in a question from Colin Mayers, and I was going to put this, Jason, to you first, only because this is something we're only now getting into over the past year or so, but I definitely want to hear from the rest of the team. And so the question is, your experience with finishing, re-racking, second maturations, etc. How has that changed over the course of your time as an independent bottler? Jason, that we're just now dealing with this, so can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you to Colin of the Plural Mayors for that. Much appreciated. It's, Sukhinder spoke to this earlier, Ollie spoke to this earlier. I think Connal might even have spoken to this earlier as well. But seeing what's being offered in the marketplace, there's more and more, Joshua uses this word all the time because he loves it. There's more and more knackered wood just stopping whiskey from becoming a puddle on a floor than actually doing anything useful as far as maturation is concerned. And so there's a lot of pale, bland, quiet whiskey coming out. And if you're trying to buy a parcel, even the small parcels that we buy, you need to do something with it. You need to give it a bit of oomph, maybe a bit of the texture we talked about earlier. We've never wanted to re-rack in the name of color, but obviously if you use fresher wood, you will get the added benefit of additional color there, natural color from the wood. So that's to the good. But right now we are mostly ex-bourbon and ex-sherry re-racking project. We haven't gone too crazy with anything that Susanna mentioned in her earlier question. But yeah, the thing for us is if we've had a fun cask maturation that went to the nation online, we've maybe taken that cask, if it's still active, and used it to finish. What's Mark Watt's new term? I know Mark hates finishing. What's the new term that he uses that isn't finishing?
Oh, I don't know the term.
Yeah, I don't know if it's resting or reinvigorating. He's in the comments. He'll tell us in a second. But the idea there is to connect our threads. So even though we're not necessarily rested. Okay, it is rested. So thank you. Okay, good. Everyone's here now. And so even though we're not looking to necessarily put a new spin on flavor there, we are looking to connect the dots of our own lines. And I think that's been a nice thing to communicate to the nation in a different way of doing re-racking. Curious to hear the other comments from the panel here.
Well, I think from my side, we don't really like finishing, i.e. short term, 6 months to a year. We feel if you're going to recask, it needs to be for a lengthier period of time generally. There is this new wave of sherry casks on the market at the moment, which are actually giving a lot of color to whiskey in a very, very short term. And there seems to be a lot of that around. So I think we're going to see a lot of youngish whiskies, which are pretty dark, over the next few years. We've experimented with them as well. Some good, some okay. So we're sort of constantly looking at, what we can do with them, who's the cask supplier, what's the difference between, cask supplier A, B, C, D, E. Even sherry casks is a science, in terms of the amount of period that the sherry rests, the charring, this, that, the other. So there's just so much to learn, which actually takes, half a lifetime. So I think for us, we've only begun our journey in terms of learning this. And I think we need another 5 to 10 years to really understand it, to say, okay, now we know what we need to do. We know what we should be filling into. We know what we should be finishing with, and then possibly using that for blending. I think what some people forget is, we're talking about single casks here as an independent bottler, but sometimes using those components to create small batch bottlings of 2 or 3 or 4 casks using different wood, actually you can produce a far better product than just a single cask on its own.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Sukhinder, in your comments about 6 months to a year being too short. From an Adelphi perspective, we've got a pretty simple policy with re-racking, and this, if we get something in that's knackered, which is a fantastic word to use, if it's a knackered sherry, it will go into something slightly more sprightly. Sherry will go to sherry, and bourbon will go to bourbon. Is pretty much our policy, how we work. So yeah, we do re-rack if we feel it needs a little bit of help on the way. But I do think that 6 months to a year is just too short for me.
This is a question just to add on to this one we have here. It came in from Peter Hunt, and I think I'll truncate it down. But basically, what's your ratio to knackered wood to non-knackered wood when you're getting casks? How much re-racking do you actually are you actually incorporating into your overall business for bottling?
I think it's more a question of how much knackered wood are you buying? If you see what I mean. Yeah. I think
Okay.
Yeah, so I think through experience what we've realized is different suppliers will have a different wood policy, Plus you also need to look at the era that the casks were filled, because if you look at the history of certain distillers, they went through rough patches in certain eras or certain periods. So during that period the cask will probably be knackered. Yeah. Now there's two ways of looking at knackered. There's knackered, and there's actually dead wood, which actually over a long period of time actually can produce or give you some amazing whiskey. Yeah. So if you see, we were talking about a very light whiskey. Actually, very light whiskey, which is 20, 30 years old, in just dead wood, can be absolutely amazing. Yeah. So I think it's knowing that fine, this whiskey is in knackered wood, but how long has it been in knackered wood? Because if it's been in knackered wood for 10 or 15 years, my gut feeling is it's probably too late to fix it. You with me?
Yeah.
Wood for 3 or 4 or 5 years, you could probably salvage it.
Interesting. Okay.
From a slightly more kind of practical what we do, I think age does play a part. So when you're buying younger stock, if you bring 3, 4, 5-year-old stock, you have to remember a lot of it, especially when you're doing the big kind of bulk stuff, is essentially blender stock. Not to disagree with anyone earlier who said we don't buy the dregs of the market, but we buy a lot of the dregs of the market. It's just how you define that, I guess, is the difficult thing. You have to remember independent bottlers essentially live off the side of the blending market, the ever shrinking blending market. We are the whelks on the bottom of the boat with the leeches, as once famously described by a director of a big distilling company. I personally embrace that. I think it's a wonderful thing. But what that does mean is if you're buying a parcel stock, and I guess this is what Skinner's talking about in terms of suppliers, if you're buying a parcel stock and it comes from someone who traditionally has made 3-4-year-old blend to be sold for pennies, essentially, when you work it out in supermarkets, they're probably not going to spend their money on, your best non-rinsed first of all bourbon barrels. They're going to use, as one of them describes them, they call them ex-dump woods. I think it's my favorite term, ex-dump. And essentially, it was described to me by a worker at the distillery. He goes, "Oh, we just call that the shit we move around the yard." Well, that kind of gives you a good idea of exactly what it's like. I quite liked earlier when someone said that the wood is simply holding the liquid in. I can promise you most of the time it doesn't even do that. From what I can work out, you look at the yields, they're pretty bad. But when you're buying a parcel like that, 3, 4, 5 years old, what you're doing is you're hedging your bets. You're saying, okay, these makes are good. We know these makes are good. We know that they can perform really well. We're getting them at a good price because it's young and because, frankly, no one wants it, and because the wood is piss poor. But we know we're going to have to probably re-rack 100, 200, 300, 600 casks or whatever. And then we'll probably have to wait for another 10 or 15 or 20 years. But that's all, frankly, calculated. You sit there and you're just basically doing the maths, going, okay, can I afford that? How does the wood work in? Where's the wood going to go afterwards? What am I going to do with it? As our business has changed from being essentially a subsidiary to a retail business, or even just part of Sukhinder's retail business, to being a standalone independent bottler, we've probably grown that quite a lot. But that's because we're thinking 10, 15, 20, 30 years in the future. So it's absolutely true what Charlie said. It is getting more difficult to find really good single casks. It's not like when Sukhinder started in 2001, you could just rock up and buy, what was the first one, Sukhinder? Tamnavillin and sherry at 30 years old. Oh yeah, and like parcels of Ardbeg. Sadly, no one's just rocking up saying, do you want, 50 casks of Ardbeg, as they used to, or the hundreds of casks of 1984 Kalila that were obviously lying around unused. But what is around and what is still done is, as the market changes, as people buy less blends, you're able to buy more blending stock, but then you have to look after that. So I think our ratio's probably changed significantly over the last 5 years as we redirect and think, okay, well, how are we going to look after this business? How are we going to look after the people who work here in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, in 30 years' time?
Suzanne, I definitely want to give you the floor, but there was a question that came in from Mark Watt that I think fits into what we're talking about here. And Sukhinder, I just want to make a comment to what you were saying before about how there can be great whiskies in deadwood. A few years ago, there was the Scotch whiskey advent calendar came out of Canada. And one year, the final bottling was a 30-year-old linkwood where the liquid was basically clear. But it was in deadwood, but the spirit was gorgeous. It was one of the finest linkwoods I've had, with no color from the cask. So I think there is value to that, and I agree with you. And so Mark Watt is saying, he of course always agrees with you, but he's curious to know if anybody is deliberately filling into old wood for long-term maturation. Is that a thing?
I actually don't know. I know there's a couple of crazy whiskey nerds, friends of ours, who that's their philosophy. If they built a distillery tomorrow, that's exactly what they would do. But I think what people don't realize is it's actually very difficult to get good old wood. Yeah, it's easier to get first fill bourbon barrels than it is old wood. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's actually not easy. Yeah. So I actually don't know the answer to that. Is it something we've contemplated? It is definitely something we've contemplated.
Yeah. Is that something Adelphi has ever looked at? Oh, sorry, Sukhinder.
I was going to say it's the same issue. It's so long term. I think everybody forgets that. It's easy to say 20 years from now, but it's such a long time.
The side to that is that when they filled linkwood, or we had some really lovely Glenrothes, which I know Adelphi bottled some as well, 89, I think, a few years ago, 88, actually 84. It was 84 Glenrothes from Adelphi. It's bottled early 2000s, which was beautiful. And we've got similar stock, and it's all, I think, ex-Highland Distillers, and the wood's terrible, or theoretically the wood would have been terrible, but now it's really pretty. But they probably weren't filling that in the 80s, going, you know what we'll do? We'll stick this in some really old wood, and then we'll leave it 30 years, and then we'll flog it to some independent bottlers who will definitely do a really good job of it. There was nobody at Highland Distillers. There's nobody at Edrington today making those plans. That it's just that it wasn't useful. Yeah, they filled it in the hope they'd sell it as 3-year-old blend, and then nobody wanted 3-year-old blend, so they kept it for probably a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, and nobody wanted that. So then they brokered it out because it had to be got rid of, and then it's hung around on people's sheets for 10 or 15 years. So it wasn't a plan. I guess now, with now there are companies like us and like Adelphi and like you could sell, so you can look at that from a liquid point of view and say, oh, I really like that. How can I recreate it? And hope that Sukhinder lets you do it for 30 years so you can find out if it works.
One of the most amazing whiskies I think I've ever tried, just because of what it was, is a Glenfitting 1955. Yeah. And I've tried 3 versions of it. So I tried a bottling they did probably about 12, 13 years ago. Absolutely gorgeous. And I tried a recent version literally 3 weeks ago, 66 years old. It's the color of water, yeah, and it's still fresh, and it's still floral, and it's amazing. But it's literally on its last legs because the strength was 40.1. Yeah, if it had the strength, that whiskey would just go on and on and on and on.
Yeah, 66. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Susanna, I wanted to toss the microphone over to you if there was any questions you wanted to insert.
Yeah, well, we've got about 20 minutes left, and I thought we could shift gears a little bit and talk about the future, because the tariffs on single malt Scotch are now lifted after a rough couple of years. I'm sure it wasn't easy for anybody on this call. Even though you've all just been telling us how hard it is to find good old single malt, in great casks, I believe you probably all have some great things up your sleeves. What do you see in terms of opportunity going forward, both broadly for Scotch whiskey, and let's say particular to the U.S. market, although we could talk about all markets, but I don't know. I think since ImpEx is hosting this, we'll focus a little bit more on the U.S. What is the opportunity for Scotch whiskey, and also for independent bottlers in the near, or if you want to project long-term future?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah. So yes, good question. So we've got a few things up our sleeves, and through our relationships, we're always getting the odd really exciting thing in. And although the pound signs are going up on everything that's deemed exciting these days, but we're still getting offered, which I suppose is nice. But we have changed our direction, I suppose, looking at further afield. So we're looking at the US for distilleries out there that we can maybe independently bottle. Jenny mentioned there that we've just picked up our first parcel of High Coast Swedish whiskey, which is fantastic. And we also do a little sort of, I wouldn't say it's a side project, it's certainly something we've been having a lot of fun with, and that is our fusion whiskies. So that is a sort of international blending, if you like. So we've been blending Scotch whiskey with Japanese single malts. We've done it with Indian single malts and Dutch single malts, and Australian, actually. We did it with Starward. And we're also just about to do our next installment of that coming very soon next year. So it's about adapting. And yeah, I think it's also really fun to do.
Since we only have 10 people in the panel, we cannot have more. I want to pass this onto my business partner, Chris. But I want to thank everyone on this panel and everyone who joined us today. It was a real, true honor, and we learned a lot. So wish everyone great and safe holidays, and thank you again for everything. Joshua, you can swap us, it'd be great.
Oh, yeah, sure, not a problem.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks,
Thanks, Sam. See ya.
Bye.
All right. So away he goes, and when Chris comes in, I will. Sam's still in the waiting room. Sam, you'll actually have to log out completely. You'll have to complete. There he goes. Okay. So did anyone else want to add some points to Susanna's question?
Yeah, I'll try and attempt it. I think from my side, I actually think the future is very uncertain. I think especially with, the boom in the whiskey industry as a whole, a lot of the distillers have closed the doors, and it's actually really hard to get stock. So unless you've started unless you laid down stock for the future many years ago, I think it's very difficult. I think there's this new tendency as well where a lot of distillers are closing the doors and saying, if we sell bulk, it's going to be teaspoon and it's going to be a blended malt rather than a single malt. I know we spoke earlier to say that many independent bottlers became distillers to help them open their doors. But actually, you know what? It can actually backfire, because if you're swapping stock and you don't want people to bottle your single malt under their brand, well, they'll say, well, I'm sorry, we don't want you to do the same either. And I've seen a lot of that as well in the industry today. So it's difficult. I think at the moment, generally, of course, the future is bright, it's healthy. The single malt whiskey market is absolutely on fire. We're talking about the US, which, you're saying is still a immature market for single casks and cask strength whiskies, etc. But you look at the rest of the world, the demand is just insane at the moment.
Yeah.
From a what we're planning point of view for the US, I guess the only thing we're really changing or adding, the only thing, apart from the nine different whiskey brands we're launching in the next year. Apart from that, we're going to be bringing in our reserve cask series into the US some point later in the year, which there you go. Which is exactly taking from what Sukhinder said earlier. It's bringing together kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 casks at a time, and for us also ties nicely into that idea that the US is still learning about independent bottling. It's a real bugbear of mine from working in retail, is getting people into independent bottling, but it is becoming more difficult because the prices are just getting too high, and frankly, the really good stuff sells out too quickly. So, you if you follow an independent bottler, if you're a fan of a particular independent bottler, it can be pretty heartbreaking when you just can't buy even the most basic of bottles. And if you are a customer and you're going from, say, drinking Balvenie Doublewood, and you walk into a shop and they go, well, you should try this beautiful Linkwood 15-year-old from Adelphi, and they say, how much is it? And they say it's £85. They're going to go, well, I normally spend £35. That's quite a big jump. And you can go, well, yeah, but it's a single cask and all the rest. But for a customer, that's still a big jump. So we put together reserve casks purely to fit almost into a price bracket. So with the idea that we could help people make that jump. So the hope is that it will, by doing slightly bigger batches, we get slightly better economies of scale, and then there's a bit more stock to go around, and we can also bottle stuff that's between, well, in the UK it's normally between, say, 50 to 70 pounds, and then I see that as a way to bridge a gap, so that we can just convert customer after customer from buying their standard single malts, moving independent bottlers, and then buy it from there. They're more willing to spend that extra 15, 20, 25, 30 pounds into single cask bottlings, from whether it's Single Malts of Scotland, from Single Cask Nation, or Adelphi. So that's our big kind of US change, and it's very much along that lines of helping to build a category, because I think that's, I go back, I still think that's the most important thing you can do, is help to build your category.
Yep, brilliant. We have 10 minutes left. Jason, please feel free. Go ahead and add what you want to add. There's one final question from Travis Williams that I want to get in after your answer.
The reason I was laughing during Susanna's question is I'm known as the biggest pessimist in our company. And so the thought of a bright and hopeful future always makes me chuckle. But definitely...
I said opportunity, Jason, not bright and hopeful. You can interpret that any way you want.
You just heard opportunity to fail, so.
Yeah, opportunities are scary. No, so part of the single cask nation answer echoes what Connal said, is looking further afield, looking into India, looking into Australia, within our own market, looking at American producers. One of the things we said earlier about having the trust of the nation is allowing us to now go and find wonderful American producers who may otherwise not be that well known, and being able to shine the light of the nation onto that. And that is very exciting. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to once we move into 2022. Unlike Ollie and the team, we don't have 9 brands coming in 2022, but we are hopeful of launching 1 new brand in 2022. And given how long we've worked on it, it's exciting.
You better set the world on fire. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Can't wait for that to be released and to actually share it and talk to people about it. But so yeah, and then again, as we've talked about all night long, just continuing to do the good work of independent bottling and to represent the category of independent bottling and to work on prices. I know there were questions in the comments or comments in the comments about the end of tariffs and how will that affect pricing. But the reality is global logistics are still a disaster. And so getting our hands on glass, getting affordable glass, consistent glass, getting shipping versus air freighting, there are still costs that are being, leveled out as best we possibly can. So we're not just shifting them onto the consumer. I'm also sure big producers will be increasing pricing in 2022 as we're looking to source more casks from them. That's going to be awkward as we try to balance the books as a company as well. So I didn't mean to get, downtrodden by the end of that answer. I feel like I was doing really well, and then the reality.
See what I mean, everybody? See what I mean?
It's an effective
pulled me under. Exactly. Yeah.
Listen,
sorry. I'll stop talking.
But before we all hang ourselves, before we get to Travis's question, Chris, now that you're here, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about the future for ImpEx collection and what you see for 2022 and beyond.
Well, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to be on. I've been drinking my single malts of Scotland Reserve cask in the background. And now that I've been put on the spot, what I would say about 2022 is it's just going to be fun. We will, we're just going to stick true to the motto, right? Just bottle really good stuff. And it kind of doesn't matter where it's come from. Everyone tonight has talked about mostly a UK perspective into doing independent bottlings. Jason, you've touched on expanding that out to the US. We're going to go a little bit more global. We have, we just had some Japanese casks come in. We have more that are in our reserves. We have some stuff down in Mexico. We have our fingers in quite a different pies in Jamaica and whatnot. And so we'll bring those forward as we can, as they're ready to be done. But glass is a little bit of an issue. But at the same time, hopefully a lot of more stuff in Scotland. And it's just going to be what it is, right? To be honest, I'm perfectly happy being quiet and watch people who have got many of my paychecks in their pockets because I buy their bottles talk about what they do because they are the best at what they do. And I kind of am loving this as a spectator rather than a moderator.
Okay. Final question here, and Chris, thank you for that. is from Travis Williams, and actually I may call on you to give the first answer as well, because
I can
just
do it.
because you could do it. So his question is, what's the one thing that stands out to you the most from your beginnings that you look back at and well, maybe I should have done that differently? Or are you happy you stayed the course? Now, Chris, ImpEx Collection, this line is the new kid on the block. So how do you answer that question as the new kid? So
I remember when there was a time where I had absolutely no money, and I had the opportunity to buy a whole bunch of bourbon casks that were 6 to 8 years old at about $600 a cask, and I should have just robbed a bank and bought them, right? But at the same time, I regret nothing, because that might have altered my journey in whiskey in a way that would not have brought me to where I am now, and I'm completely happy and satisfied with where my life is now. So I don't necessarily think I would change anything, right? Like, my life is dope. Everything is great. So why worry about an opportunity you didn't get when right now everything around me is kind of perfect? So there you go.
There you go. Jenny, Connal, how would you answer that question?
Connal and I weren't there when Jamie Walker started at Adelphi in 1992. It was just Jamie. But it was a passion project. It was something he was passionate about. He came across, Sukhinder knows Jamie, but he was passionate about whiskey. He started off with 3 casks that him and Charlie tasted and liked. And it was passion behind it. And that very much is something that Alex has taken on board and is pioneering in our team. And we're all whiskey geeks, nerds, call us whatever, I'll take it. We're all into it. We are passionate, and it's always going to be like that. We're not going to stop loving what we do. And as much as you can kick yourself in the backside for not maybe buying a parcel that was a good opportunity 10 years ago, but whatever, that happened, it didn't happen. We're passionate about whiskey. We want to put the best stuff we can in a bottle for our friends and colleagues to enjoy. And sorry, that was a bit airy-fairy, was it? It is 3 o'clock in the morning for me. It's a passion project, and that's not going to change.
Yeah.
No, at all. I agree with that, absolutely. But the one thing I would add is, it's certainly not my history. It is company history, though, is that I think in about 2008, where Alex might have had a sleepless night thinking about building a distillery, in the same sort of year, he was offered a parcel of casks that would kept Adelphi going till the end of time. And I think it was a case of, do we buy that parcel of casks, or do we somehow fund it, or do we go for this distillery? And obviously we went for the distillery option. Now, I think it was, yeah, you know what, we probably should have done, and we can talk offline to which parcel of casks this was. Honestly, I know what was in there, and you kind of kick yourself now knowing what you know in 2021. But yeah, we had a choice to basically to do that and be an independent bottler for the rest of our days, or control the destiny with a distillery. So we went with option B.
Yeah. Oh my gosh! Now I want to know what this parcel was.
Oh no, you don't. You really don't.
The thing that I would say here, and I would definitely love to hear your answer on this as well, Joshua. But we're 10 years at this, from 0 to wherever we are today. We knew that we weren't laying down enough stock. We knew we weren't buying enough casks at the price that they were, because we knew that the availability was going to decline. We knew that we just weren't putting enough aside for the future. But we couldn't change it. A bit like Uhde's saying here about, you're offered cask, but you don't have the money for it. We were spending everything we had to build the company, build the reputation, travel around, like I said earlier, pouring bottles for people. And so when we look back, we know what we didn't do, but we knew we weren't doing it at the time when we couldn't afford to do it. So, Joshua?
You've taken the words out of my mouth. To my mind, I feel as if we did everything in the manner that we could have or should have done to get where we are. I think we took the right chances at the right time, and thank God didn't, crumble under bankruptcy or any of these other issues. But then there are things that you don't consider happening, like pandemics and Brexits and tariffs and all these things. And so if the world had continued on as the world was going, I think it'd be okay. I'd have fewer regrets saying no to some parcels, but seeing as the world is what it is, I kind of wish we said yes to some parcels and found money somewhere, whether it was robbing banks or like Chris wanted to do, or what have you. But here we are.
Oceans,
keep plugging along.
Oceans 3 right here.
Oceans 3. And Sukhinder and the Elixir team, what say you?
Wish Sukhinder had bought all that bloody Liquori. I mean, Jesus.
I was going to say the opposite. I'm glad we bought all that stock. I'm glad we bought I think, look, in hindsight, it's nobody knows. Nobody knew. When I think back, and I had Cask Klein 722, and we were just bottling it and drinking it and enjoying it, and never really thought anything about it. Just we knew it was really good whiskey, but my regret is not keeping more back, bottled stock to carry on drinking. You keep 2 or 3 bottles here and 2 or 3 bottles there, and it's one of those things.
Does anyone else see the big cabinets behind Sukhinder as he says that he wishes he kept more?
There is a question of space first. You've got to at some point realise that there's a question of space to keep all this back. There's all this new stuff coming that you want to keep back. So
I know.
Well, everybody, this really has been brilliant. We've just about hit our time. Thank you all again. I realize it's 3 a.m. for a good number of you, and so this is me thanking you and also saying, please go to bed. Please get a good night's sleep. The holidays are coming, so you have to be bright and chipper with them. Jenny's already halfway to sleep. She just finished. Oh, look at that. There you go. Connal now too. One thing I wanted to mention to you all, and of course to our listeners as well, the 4-minute clip of the conversation between Sam, Charlie McLean, and myself was just a portion of a larger conversation, which is now live on the ImpEx Beverages YouTube channel. So it's live as of 2 minutes ago. So if you're interested, you can check it out. If you're not subscribed to the ImpEx YouTube channel, we ask you to do that. It was a really fun conversation. Charlie is always a really good time. But thank you all again. I hope you have just the best for the holidays, the best for the remainder of 2021, right? It shouldn't get any worse than it is now, right?
Don't say that. Say that.
Oh shit! Oh, I mean, heck.
Pessimists unite.
This is our Christmas party, actually. This is our only Christmas party.
Sad time, Jenny.
I said that while walking under a ladder and smashing mirrors as well. So, listen, get to bed. To the viewers, thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate all of your comments, all of the questions that came in. To Colin, the pluralized mayors, to Travis Williams for sending in your questions. Thank you so much. Susanna, thank you so much for being my partner in crime. I loved your questions. This was a lot of people to manage, and you were wonderful. You were the best help I could ever ask for.
boy,
So
stop it some
behaved.
more.
He doesn't speak to me like this. I'm doing something wrong.
You're being pessimistic, Jason.
No, he
That's just the
really
booster
doesn't talk to
talking.
me like this. Cheers to ImpEx.
Yeah,
Yes.
cheers to ImpEx.
Thank you, Joshua, for being our illustrious host.
Yeah. Cheers,
My
Joshie.
pleasure. My pleasure. Cheers, everybody. Have a great night. More
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye bye.
Cheers.